Okay, I think we'll get started. So today we're going to cover just some basic ideas of calculus. You do not need calculus for this course. So just kind of, if you haven't had any calculus, just kind of hang tight and pull out the main ideas. We have to bring in a few concepts from calculus to really understand what's going on in neuroscience, but we don't need a whole lot. If you are doing the take it further part of this course, where in the problem sets you're doing some of the take it further problems, then there'd be a chance to use some calculus. So if you have had some calculus, what I encourage you to do is, as we go along, try to think about where calculus might apply here. But for today, I just want to try to lay out the basics of why we need to even talk about calculus here in neuroscience. Well, in neuroscience, many things change with time. And so what calculus really is good at is changes. So calculus is a way to very rigorously handle things that change with time or things that change with position. It doesn't have to be time. We'll focus mainly on time here. So let's imagine we've got this function that is some property of the neuron. It might be the open state of ion channel. It might be the concentration of calcium in the cell, something that might change with time. So it's a function. F here is a function of time. The question is, what is the rate of change? Well, one way to think about it is we would say, let's take and measure that property at one time, T2, and at another time, T1, maybe T1 and then T2, so final minus initial. And then a possible definition for that rate of change would be delta F over delta T. Now the trouble is, what is the choice of T1 and T2? That this difference in F might change, or it might not, but the fact that it might change makes this definition not so good. So let's look at an example here. Let's imagine this red function. Well, now if I take T1 and T2, I measure the same rate of change per step size here. So if instead I would have taken this point and then my step would have been accordingly smaller. So I would have gotten the same result every time. So if I have a straight line, no problem. There's no ambiguity there. The trouble comes when we have something that's curved. And so if I take this difference and then I take another point, that doesn't change proportionally like it did with the line. So there's an ambiguity of what are those two measurements you're supposed to take to define the rate of change. And that's where calculus comes in. The idea here is it's a very careful way of making that step infinitesimally small, so not a macroscopic step. And it has to be handled very carefully, but that has been done for almost 200 years now, and we are very good at calculus. So we have some good rules, and then in college we often learn calculus if you're going into engineering or chemistry or physics. Neuroscience, be very good to take a calculus class, and I really would encourage you to do so as you increase your number of courses you start to take here in neuroscience. But the basic idea is we make this very small, and we change this delta to a d to kind of symbolize that. And we define then what we call the derivative of the function, which is very similar to this, except that we're not taking a macroscopic step, we're taking an infinitesimal step. And the thing is that if you make that step smaller, no matter how curved the function is, you can always make that step small enough that the function looks like a straight line. That's kind of the basic principle of all this. Okay, well, so we consider the derivative as the instantaneous rate of change. So I can take and I can do this at any point in time. I can say, I'm going to take the function, take just an infinitesimal step in time, and then define its derivative, and then another time and another time. So we can make a plot or a graph of the derivative of a function just as easily as we can the function itself. Now, graphing is a nice way to look at things. So let's look at a graph of a function itself. What is this derivative? Well, it really is a slope. right? I said if we make this small enough, everything becomes a straight line. Well, that straight line is this tangent line. At any point, you can draw a line that just skims the curve at that one point. And the slope of that line, how it's sloped, is the rate of change, the instantaneous rate of change of that function. And so that's another way to define the derivative as the instantaneous slope. Right? And then we could go along here and say, oh, that's a slope of 5, that's a slope of 2, that's a slope of -1. And we could plot those slopes, and we would be, again, plotting the derivative of that function. Okay, well, sometimes in neuroscience, we might know the derivative, and we would be very interested in figuring out what the actual function was. And so to undo a derivative is to take the antiderivative, or oftentimes we say take the integral of a function. So antiderivative and integral are essentially synonymous here. And we have this kind of crazy symbol here, this kind of hooked symbol of f and then d, this infinitesimal variable. So what this really means is we're just adding up the function along that whole time frame. And that does give the antiderivative. So if we want to take the antiderivative of a function, let's just take some simple functions. If I take something that's constant, like 5, so if my function, if f of t is just 5 for every single t, it's a flat function. So I'm asking what kind of function it has a slope of 5, right? Well, that's going to be y equal, or let's do x equals 5t, right? But this function has a slope of 5, but so does any function that has that slope and then just has some kind of offset. So we'll just say plus b, or plus c, we'll say. So this c always comes along. So when you take an antiderivative, you're actually getting a family of functions, and they're just the same shape. They're just pushed up or down on the graph. And so this is called an integration constant. And oftentimes then what you do is you use some other piece of information to determine that constant. So let's say the function was 5, the derivative of the function was 5, but at time equals 0, the function was equal to 3. Well, then we would plug in a 0 here. We would say it was equal to 3, and it would say c is 3. So then c is 3 throughout. So you always have a different so-called either initial condition or boundary condition that helps you figure out what this actually was. And we'll see that in just a bit here. Okay. I'll just say this, if you take the integral of something that's a slope, you'll get a parabola. Those of you who've had some calculus, that might be pretty familiar to you. Okay, well, we have calculus. Now we're going to talk about differential equations, which of course would be a class that a math major would take way out into the curriculum. But let's look at this and just take the very basics. So if we're going to look at the rate of change of some property x, then a differential equation is just an equation that involves the derivative. And so one simple example here, and these can be much more elaborate, but one simple example here is if the derivative is equal to some function of both that property and maybe of time as well. So if x depends on time, this function can depend on x itself, or it could depend on time. Now, it is often the case that it's one or the other, right? Not always, certainly not always, but it often is. And then we can use what is called separation of variables as the technique. So let's look at an example here. And this is going to be related to a critical example that we will use, and I'll go through here very explicitly. So let's imagine it's equal to the function of just x, not t. Well, we can separate the variables by bringing the t over to this side of the equation and the f over to this side, like this. And then this only depends on x, and this only depends on t. And so then we can take the integral, or the antiderivative of both sides. Okay? And so let's see an example of this worked out. And this is going to be a very critical example. This is an example when f is just x itself times some constant, k, let's say. Okay? Now, let's do this separation of variable techniques. We realize it's of this form. So this is going to become dx over, I'm going to just, so I can do this, I'm just going to take the x itself. Right? This is just kind of a trick of the trade. You could take the k with you, but I'm going to just leave that behind because it's just a constant. And that's going to be k dt. Okay, so we've got this. Now let's go ahead and take the antiderivative of both sides. Now, I'm going to just tell you this if you haven't had calculus. This is such an important antiderivative in neuroscience, and that is if we have the antiderivative of 1 over x here, then this is going to be log, the natural log of x. Okay. Now, yes, plus a constant, right? I'll call that C1. And this side, this is just going to be the antiderivative of a constant, which we said was a straight line. So that's going to be k, it's going to have this slope, t plus C2. Okay? Now, a constant is a constant. So I can, this is an equation, so I can bring that over to this side and combine those two constants and just call it some other constant because we don't know what it is yet. We have to figure that out at the end. So I don't need two of them, I just need one. So I've got log of x equals kt plus, I'll just call this c now. It's really c2 minus c1, but who cares? Because we don't know what those are either. We're going to figure this out at the end. Okay, now what we need to do is unlog this side. So we go back to high school and working with logs. To get this undone, we have to take the exponent of both sides of this equation. I'm indicating that here with this e coming through this equation. So that's going to be e log x equals e kt plus c. And now I'm going to use some properties of exponents. This just undoes the log, so that's just going to become x. And this is going to be e to the kt times e to the c. And the property I'm using here is e to the a plus b equals e to the a, e to the b. So maybe you remember that from back in high school, but that's where that's coming from. Well, let's go ahead and call this, that's just e to some constant, which itself is a constant. So let's just call this x naught. That's just some constant that we have there. So then we have an exponential function and times a constant. Now, what is x naught? Well, x naught is the value of the function at t equals 0. So let's put in t equals 0. Then we have x equals x naught e to the 0. Well, anything raised to the 0 power is 1. So that's how we interpret that. So if we knew, say, the starting concentration of calcium, and we wanted to see how that changed over time, we would solve a differential equation like this, and we would get an exponential behavior. Oftentimes it's exponential decay, but it could be exponential growth. And so that just depends on the sign of k. If k is negative, then what people often do is they make k positive but put a minus sign out front just so that K is positive. But that doesn't really matter. You just have to keep track of things very carefully. Okay, so that is the one critical example here. And so we're going to see this next time when we talk about electronics. We're going to see this when we're talking about influx of ions. So we're going to see this come up a lot. Again, you don't have to, if you haven't had calculus, you don't need to sit down with a piece of paper and try to derive this from scratch. If you have had calculus, give that a try. But I want you to have seen this so that when we say, oh, this is going to end up being an exponential behavior, you say, okay, yeah, I don't know exactly how that works. I haven't had calculus, but I know that that's the answer because we just worked it out here. All right, so that covers today's lecture. Next lecture will be on electronics. So again, we're slogging through a bunch of disjointed topics, but they're all necessary to understand neuroscience. And I think it really speaks to the heart of the matter that neuroscience is a very interdisciplinary subject. And you or a team of people have to be good at a lot of things to be a good neuroscientist.